Welcome back to Whence, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
This is episode 373. Welcome back to the program. This week I've got a couple quick articles and some news. A new Masonic Minute from illustrious Brother Stephen L. Harrison. So let's get right into it in just a moment. The Whence podcast is brought to you through the generous support of Masonic Revival, contemporary Masonic designs made for today's Freemason. You don't have to settle for throwing a plain old square and compass on anything anymore. Now you get something truly designed and truly wonderful. Whether it's aprons, awesome pins, and wonderful neckwear, bow ties, pocket squares, you name it, Masonic Revival has it. Head on over to MasonicRevival.com and check out what they have to offer. If you use promo code WCY at checkout, that means free shipping also. And make sure if you see Brother Edgar, tell him thanks for helping bring this program to all of you. And this program is also brought to you by all of you, those of you who support this program. We can't do it without you and your donations and all of your assistance, so thank you so much. To find out more about how you can assist this program, head on over to WCYpodcast.com and click on Support the Show. There you can make direct donations, sign up to be a monthly contributor, a fellow, or even a producer. And thanks very much to everybody for donating. So both of the pieces that I have for you this week come from the California Freemason. Now, if you are unfamiliar, I would urge you to go to the website, which is freemason.org. Very simple, easy to remember. And you're going to hover over news and click on the California Freemason Magazine. Now, their content is really amazing, and they do a great job with their website and their magazine. I should also mention that permission to reprint articles from this publication are granted to all recognized Masonic publications, with credit to the author, photographer, and this publication. So, the first piece, as I've said, is coming from the California Mason Magazine, and this comes from the latest issue, November-December 2018. The title caught me because I myself love jazz. The article is called The Masons of Jazz, and ever since I was a kid, I would be at Disneyland and listen to the 1920s and 1930s band sounds, Louis Armstrong, all these greats, right? Art Blakey on the drums, like just great musicians. And as I grew older, it became more infrequent that I would be able to listen to this kind of music. So I did end up finding this really great thing that I invite everybody out there to listen to if you're a fan of jazz. It's called Riverwalk Jazz from Stanford University Libraries. And of course, if you go to their website, riverwalkjazz.stanford.edu, you can listen to episodes of the Jim Cullum Riverwalk Jazz Collection. And they've got 2 streams all the time on their website, and you can listen to them. They're somewhat narrated with great stories and all this if you're into that. But again, this idea of jazz is always, like I said, I love jazz. I've got a bunch of old jazz records that I listen to all the time, and this article just kind of spoke to me a little bit. So I'd like to go ahead and read this for you. It's The Masons of Jazz, Deep Masonic Friendships Connected the Giants of Jazz, and it's by Michelle Simone. From Count Basie to Cab Calloway to Duke Ellington, many of the American jazz greats of the early to mid-20th century have long been household names throughout the United States and well beyond. What's not as well known is that many of these male musicians and their artistic contemporaries were also Prince Hall Masons devoted to each other and united by their craft. Hubs of creativity. Medina Lodge No. 19, a Prince Hall Lodge in New York City, is known for nursing deep friendships between artists and musicians. This legacy dates back to the 1920s when it was home to composer U.B. Blake and his lifelong friend and songwriter partner, Noble Sissel. Archival photos and videos show the two men reveling in each other's company as they performed together. Blake on piano and Sissel beside him, charming audiences with their contagious enthusiasm and visible delight. The strong sense of fellowship was carried through their Masonic community. Jazz icon Count Basie, the king of swing, was also a Medina Lodge member, and among the moments of fellowship he recounted fondly in his autobiography was the band's gig on a tourist cruise for which Blake was also in attendance. Quote, "Eubie was his usual fun-loving self. He claimed that he was warming up for his 87th birthday celebration," end quote, quipped Basie. Blake and Sissel, aka the Dixie Duo, were most well known for composing the lyrics and music to Shuffle Along, produced in 1921. It was the first all-black musical to become a box office hit. Although today's audiences would find some portrayals of black Americans in Shuffle Along to be problematic, it was a fundamental contribution to the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance. The musical launched the careers of many prominent black actors and vocal artists, including those of several Masons, lifting one another up. Among the talented alumni of Shuffle Along was the multi-talented actor and singer Paul Robeson, made a Mason at sight. First introduced to many American audiences by Blake and Sissel, he moved on to selling out productions of the musical Showboat in London largely because of his moving performance of the song Old Man River. In 1930, Robeson continued to transcend barriers by starring in groundbreaking performances of Shakespeare's Othello. Grammy award-winning singer and jazz pianist Nat King Cole is another notable Shuffle Along alumnus. He performed as a pianist in the national tour, perhaps most known today for his 1951 hit performance of the song Unforgettable by Irving Gordon. Cole was a Prince Hall Mason and a lifelong member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP. When criticized for playing before a segregated audience in the early part of his career, he defended his decision, explaining, "I may be helping to bring harmony between people through my music." Perhaps because of this desire to reach diverse audiences regardless of their views around racial equality, Cole later became the first black American performer to host a variety TV series, The Nat King Cole Show. Though it lasted only a year, Cole used his platform to promote the work of fellow jazz artists, including Masons like Basie, and the major highlight of his film career was playing W.C. Handy, known as the Father of Blues, alongside famed showman, singer, and band leader Cab Calloway, a member of Pioneer Lodge No. 1 in St. Paul, Minnesota. It is possible that Cole's inspiration for elevating his brothers' careers was at least partially inspired by his home lodge, Thomas Waller Lodge No. 49 in Los Angeles. Jazz enthusiasts may recognize its legendary namesake, Thomas Fats Waller, widely considered to be one of the greatest jazz pianists ever. Among Waller's many accolades was a Grammy Hall of Fame award for his recording of Ain't Misbehavin', which later inspired a 1978 musical by the same title, a tribute to the black musicians of the Harlem Renaissance, spreading brotherly love. Although Prince Hall musicians did not often speak publicly of their Masonic friendships, a sense of kinship is evident when viewing photos and videos of the era of brothers performing together. Brothers also nodded to their Masonic friendships in subtle ways, such as Duke Ellington, a member of Social Lodge No. 1 in Washington, D.C., and a 32nd Scottish Rite Prince Hall Mason, who is shown in his autobiography wearing a Shriner's fez. Their close-knit friendships were also clearly evident to non-Masons who frequently interacted with brothers, such as Louis Armstrong, who reminisces in his own autobiography about his enthusiasm for performing at Masonic funerals. In his autobiography, bassline Milt Hinton, the dean of jazz bass players, provided precious insight into the strong Masonic friendships his contemporaries enjoyed on the road. He belonged to Pioneer Lodge No. 1 at the same time as Calloway and recalled how several musicians in their band made it a priority to attend Lodge whenever they were in St. Paul. Quote, "There were enough of us in the band to have our own Lodge meeting on the road," wrote Hinton. "Sometimes backstage between shows, we'd have a short meeting and conduct readings." Prince Hall musicians also drew upon their Masonic values of tolerance and respect while traveling to perform for audiences around the world. As jazz music reached near universal popularity, its musicians were oftentimes turned to for fostering diplomacy. A prime example is that of brother Lionel Hampton, aka the King of the Vibes. He was initially known for introducing the vibraphone to jazz music, yet it was his notable talent as a composer and arranger for the self-titled Lionel Hampton Orchestra that cemented his global reputation. In 1957, U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower appointed Hampton as the American Goodwill Ambassador, a role extended by President Richard Nixon. Over the course of several years, Hampton and his orchestra made numerous tours throughout Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, sharing their music and exploring the cultures of the world. A document in the U.S. National Archives reports on Hampton's journey to the Far East, stating, quote, "Lionel Hampton has charisma all his own. His personality reaches out to people and they react favorably. He is completely cooperative and equally engaging to the Thai public, whether playing clubs, giving jazz workshops, performing for the royal household, or touring the markets and landmarks of the city. Hampton once said, quote, "Gratitude is when memory is stored in the heart and not in the mind." And it is a sense of humility and gratitude that seems to tie together the legacies of these great Masonic artists. As each of them achieved remarkable personal success, they were tied together and lifted up by the bond of brotherly love that they all shared. It was an internal force, a sense of strength to move forward, coupled with an obligation to carry their brothers with them. As Hinton put it, being a Mason is a sacred thing. Now, I hope you guys all enjoyed that. Again, this was by Michelle Simone, but I definitely recommend the article. A wonderful piece to read for your lodge as we celebrate sometimes some of the 7 liberal arts and sciences, one of which is, of course, music, which is numbers in time. And what better example than jazz? Now comes the point in the show where I ask you to help support this show. How do we do that? Well, we have a bunch of different ways to do that today. If you head on over to wcypodcast.com, you can click on direct donation through PayPal, which we briefly touched on at the beginning of the program. Of course, you can make that one-time donation, or you can sign up to be a monthly contributor, contributing $2 a month, $5, or even $10 a month. Whatever you choose really helps the program out. Of course, we have a limited edition shop where you can pick up any number of items that come direct from us. Help us out by going to MasonicRevival.com, but also we have some other affiliates that are really important. Banker's Best, one of the most unique things we've ever done, is to work with Brother Levi Banker out of St. Louis, who owns his own company called Banker's Best Beard and Skincare. He's been so generous. If you head to wcypodcast.com, click on More, then click on Banker's Best, and you can check out a bunch of the different products he's got. He's got a whole line of beard care products, skin care, oils, balms, all of this stuff, and he has been doing it a long time. He knows a lot about it. Everything is handmade, quality items. We even came up with the King Solomon's Reserve Beard Balm, which is a few years old now, but remains one of the great products that he still offers. Even the artwork on the bottle was done by a brother. The nice thing about this particular product is 50% of the proceeds come back to the program. If you're a history guy like me, then you'll be pleased to know that what makes the beard oil and balm very special is that it was made utilizing the fragrances specific to the exports of King Solomon's time and location, which is amazing. So black fig and honey is the formula. Luxurious scent, as Levi says, truly fit for our first Grand Master. If you use the promo code BBWCY357 at checkout, you'll also get a little bit of a percentage off. Please check that out. Banker's Best, or just head on over to buybankersbest.com. We also have a code with On It. You can go to our website, click on More, then go to On It, and you can click through any of the links here, or just go to onit.com and use the promo code WCY at checkout. You'll get 10% off, and they'll send a little bit back to the program to help us out. And of course, it's business time. The book that I wrote with John T. Ruark, it is making some real waves, and people are using it and seeing success. So check that out on Amazon. You can click right to it. You can get it on Audible, Kindle, or in print, even on iBooks. And last but not least, I want to ask you to check out the Great Books program. You'll see the banner for it on the left-hand side, Intellectual Linear Progression. Use the promo code WCY, or you can just click on that link there, and you'll actually go right to the website and hear a little bit from Scott Hambrick about how awesome the program is. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoy, and thank you so much for helping us out. Now, the next one I've got for you actually also comes from the California Mason, but from way back in the November-December issue of 2016, and it's called Freeing the Mind, Freemasonry's Key to a More Conscious Existence by Ronald J. Watkins. Throughout history, most of humanity has existed in a stage of bondage. When we consider this concept, we tend to envision the past, tyrants, kings, emperors, oligarchs, and juntas who all ruled and oppressed their nations and subjects. Yet, it is no different today. In the first decades of the 21st century, just 40% of the world's population can be said to be free. 60% are either not free or are only partially so. Many nations suffer from intolerance, controlled, and limited economies, corruption, and absence of free expression. But although life today is, as it has been throughout history for most of mankind, marked by oppression and misery, the desire for freedom calls to every individual. The commanding self. Greek philosophers appreciated the necessity of freedom for a happy life, and studied its nature and practices in society. They understood that personal freedom could only exist within a society that permitted it, that the power of the state was capable of destroying freedom and often did. Their desire was for a state that respected freedom of the individual, allowing for personal evolution and improvement. But the state is not the only mechanism that denies men their freedom. There is another mechanism, one universal among all humanity, even in those nations that are considered to be free. It is another form of slavery, one so well disguised that it is all but unrecognizable, the bondage each man imposes upon himself. Freedom depends as much on the individual as it does upon the society in which he lives. Never has the glitter of existence been brighter or more ubiquitous than those of us living in those nations identified as quote-unquote free. On a daily basis, we are presented with a material existence and social interactions that indicate that we are free, that we can do whatever we want, and that anyone or any institution that seeks to limit our behavior is bad. But behind this florid facade lies our enslavement. Plato recognized this, even in his time. Individual freedom, he cautioned, is the ability of the individual to reason and learn without impediment from the materialism rampant in society. Idris Shah, author and teacher of the Sufi tradition, writes of a personal, commanding self in his book of the same name. Quote, "The grafting of emotion-based ideas on top of the primitive without maturing the latter produces the commanding self, which affects much of everyone's daily thinking." End quote. He describes the commanding self as part of our undeveloped, base personality that dictates our immediate response and often our sustained reactions to life situations. The commanding self is the product of our upbringing, of both our families and culture, and it compels our reactions to specific events without requiring conscious thought. It may even guide the course of our lives without ever realizing it. The commanding self is a form of implanted tyranny, and if left in control, it withholds from us the knowledge of our true selves. If we cannot contain it, we may pass through life reacting to and facing unpleasant consequences, never acting as our own masters and ignorant of our potential. It can deny us individual freedom and personal happiness. Though most men claim to admire individuality and free thought, their practice in life is very often quite different. Men tend to gravitate toward conformity, yielding to their natural inclination to emulate one another, to seek the approval of others, who they view as more powerful. David Reisman, a sociologist and educator, commented on this behavior, stating that, quote-unquote, "Men are created different. They lose their social freedom and their individual autonomy in seeking to become like each other." The desire for likeness holds a powerful attraction, one that our increasingly interconnected digital world makes more and more difficult to resist. The consequence is that too few choose to exercise their free will, to be truly free. Men are as shackled today by upbringing, habit, custom, conformity, and expectations as they have always been. In fact, the enslavement of today's humanity is all the greater because it exists within the illusion of freedom. Men as agents. As the pervasive influence of church and the nuclear family have largely vanished from the society, the concept of freedom has become distorted from its traditional meaning. It is taken by a large portion of society to mean unbridled license, freedom from consequences. But those who side with Plato's logic, believing that freedom necessitates a triumph over materialism, a wholly unfettered life is clearly not the right path. If freedom, then, is not the right to do whatever one wants, what is it? Geoffrey Chaucer, in The Canterbury Tales, offers the early Anglo-Saxon interpretation of freedom when he describes it as generosity, frankness with others, and a cheerful willingness to perform one's duty. In his mind, free will is a moral responsibility. This sentiment is echoed by Johann Gedeek, author of a German lexicon of Freemasonry, who writes, quote, "We are, or should be, free from the dominion of passion, pride, prejudice, and all the other follies of human nature. We are free from the false delusion that we need not to be obedient to the laws." End quote. Famed historian, Freemason, Confederate Army General, and author Albert Pike tells us, "With man's exercise of thought are inseparably connected freedom and responsibility. Man assumes his power, rank as a moral agent, when with a sense of the limitations of his nature arise the consciousness of freedom, and of the obligations accompanying its exercise, the sense of duty, and the capacity to perform it. He adds, freedom of man lies in his reason. He can reflect upon his own future conduct and summon up its consequences. He can take wide views of human life and lay down rules for constant guidance. Thus he is relieved of the tyranny of sense and passion, and enabled at any time to live according to the whole light of the knowledge that is within him, instead of being driven, like a dry leaf in the wings of the wind, by every present impulse." End quote. To follow this logic, then, by abusing drugs, engaging in promiscuous sex, and bending and breaking the rules of honesty, we are simply wrapping ourselves in self-imposed chains. Writing in the middle of this century, the author and philosopher Ayn Rand observed that, quote, "Man is the only living species that has the power to act as his own destroyer, and that is the way he has acted through most of its history." End quote. Like power, freedom cannot only exist as a concept. It implies a necessity for action. In the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, one of the leading thinkers of the Enlightenment, freedom is expressed by the question, "What should I do?" It is our response to this moral question that determines if we are free. Preservationists of freedom. Freemasonry, by its nature and practice, leads men into the light, toward freedom, and away from darkness imposed upon them by formative and societal influences. It is an institution intended and structured to promote the highest ideals of civilization. It advocates civic liberty, freedom of conscience, and individual rights. It espouses that society at large must permit freedom of action as well as of thought. Men cannot be free within themselves unless they live within a culture that is itself free. Therefore, the concepts of personal and societal freedom are inextricably intertwined. Accordingly, Freemasons are intrinsically linked to the concept and exercise of national freedom. It can be fairly stated that the existence of Freemasonry for the last 300 years has been largely defined by the pursuit of such freedom. Masons have led revolutions to overthrow tyrants and kings, established liberal governments, and been included among the greatest thinkers and artists of the Western world. These include Johann Goethe, Christopher Wren, Alexander Pushkin, Wolfgang Mozart, Robert Burns, Simone Bolivar, Giuseppe Garibaldi, and George Washington, to name a few. Masons have advocated and advanced freedom even at peril to their own lives, actively opposed the oppression of religious control of government, and advocated and brought about democracies, established liberal arts colleges, and promoted secular, universal education. To preserve freedom is one of our greatest callings as brothers. We are obligated to speak and act against injustice. Into the light. True freedom is one that each man must define for himself. We are the only ones who can truly know if we are free or reacting to influences outside ourselves and forces within. It is for this reason that Freemasonry focuses on teaching each brother to free himself of unchecked passions, unwholesome desires, destructive social conversations, and negative expectations. We are taught to see and stay clear of the chasm into which we might otherwise plunge. Returning to Rand, man is free to evade reality. He is free to unfocus his mind and stumble blindly down the road as he pleases, but not free to avoid the abyss he refuses to see. End quote. The word freedom is used in Freemasonry in a symbolic or metaphysical sense that differs from its ordinary meaning. Freemasonry, and in particular the local lodge, serves as a vehicle to free men from the materialistic forces of the outside, that is, the profane world. It opens the mind, providing a path that leads away from our internal chains, away from bigotry, intolerance, and narcissism. Masonic rituals emphasize freedom and the exercise of free will, so that each brother can incorporate them within his life. From the early 18th century through present day, Masonic lectures have identified freedom, fervency, and zeal as the qualities that each brother should aspire to. In Plato's Republic, Socrates relates the allegory of the cave in which a group of prisoners live chained within a cave all their lives, facing a blank wall from which they cannot turn. Unable to observe and participate in real life, they observe shadows moving across the face of the wall, shadows created by those who pass before a fire behind them. The prisoners, knowing no better, give names to these shadows. This is as close as they can get to perceiving reality. So for them, the shadows are real. A philosopher, according to Socrates, is someone who has freed himself from the metaphoric prison of unlightened human existence in order to perceive the true forms surrounding him. So it is that Freemasons turn away from metaphorical shadows on the wall and toward Masonic enlightenment. At each man's entrance into the craft, he is introduced to reality in its true form, without the obstructive shadows cast by his own preconceptions and societal influences. To advance his journey of discovery, the lodge serves as a home for fraternal interaction. It is here that many of life's important lessons are learned, such as leadership, trustworthiness, public speaking, willing obedience to authority, the practice of democracy, and respect of rules and law. What is often called the quote-unquote magic of Masonry transforms shy, uncertain men into those who are self-assured, confident, natural leaders and willing followers. The lodge also serves the essential role of initiation. Repeated exposure to the ritual of the 3 degrees allows its lessons, especially those of a profound and subtle nature, to slowly permeate the subconscious of the brother, releasing him from negative habits and practices, freeing his mind of dogma, so he is open to the greater influences of the divine. In the final analysis, Masonry is about liberating men, enabling them to experience true personal freedom. In doing so, it enables them to be better husbands, fathers, sons, and citizens, better men all around. Zev ben Shimon Halevi speaks of this change in the work of the Kabbalist when he writes, quote, "The gift of free will is greatly misunderstood, for while most people believe they have it, they seldom use it, preferring to be carried by habit and circumstance until fate confronts them with a choice. When the option of true individuality is taken up, then there is an awakening of the soul, which allows people not only to act independently, but to be responsible for their own lives." End quote. To take this important step to free ourselves of negative conditioning, unhealthy conformity, and destructive expectations requires enormous change. It is not easy to change ourselves, which is why so few men do it. We are tested time and time again. We fall short. We disappoint ourselves. But with the support of the craft, its ritual, and our brothers, we can become and remain free. We can be powerful advocates for good. We can make a difference. It takes resoluteness to exercise responsible moral freedom for ourselves and others. But only through pushing that path can we be truly satisfied with our lives and Masonic journeys. Freedom is essential to happiness, and it is within our reach. Editor's note, Ronald J. Watkins is a past master of Wayfarers Lodge number 50 and a past district deputy grand master of the Grand Lodge of Arizona. He is currently master of Cuenca Wayfarers Lodge number 69 and deputy grand chancellor of the Grand Lodge of Ecuador. He is also author of more than 30 books, including Unknown Seas, How Vasco da Gama Opened the East, and has discussed his works on a number of notable television programs. Again, this one came from 2016, and it was called Freemasonry's Key to a More Conscious Existence. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. Let's check out this week's Masonic Minute.
Do you enjoy comedy roasts? You know, there are those events where people get up and destroy their friends in what is allegedly good-natured fun. With apologies to sensitive or politically correct listeners, here are a few examples of actual things people have said about their so-called friends in such roasts. It's no coincidence George Hamilton loves the sun. They were born in the same year. Yeah, the difference is the sun is actually a star. Yeah, then there's Justin Bieber. His fans are called Beliebers because it's politically incorrect to use the word retards. And what about William Shatner? He's put on a few pounds since his Captain Kirk days. Bill, you were supposed to explore the galaxy, not fill it. Modern comedy roasts date back to the Friars Club events of the late 1940s and have progressed, if you can call it progress, to today's televised productions that seemingly make a science of mean-spirited nastiness. What may be the original comedy roast, however, dates well before the Friars thought of presenting organized evenings of vitriol. That honor goes to a gala event the Atlantic Monthly held in Boston the evening of December 17, 1877, celebrating poet John Greenleaf Whittier's 70th birthday. People today revere Brother Mark Twain as an American treasure. During his lifetime, he was in demand as a speaker, and it seemed no one was more well-suited to deliver the keynote address on that auspicious occasion. Ever the mischievous humorist, Twain decided to go over the top and take a few friendly jabs at some of the impressive guests in attendance, specifically Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Oliver Wendell Holmes, Sr. He launched into a story about stumbling upon a miner's shack. The miner told him, "You are the fourth literary man that has been here in 24 hours. I'm going to move." The others were Mr. Longfellow, Mr. Emerson, and Mr. Oliver Wendell Holmes. Confound the lot. Mr. Emerson was a seedy little bit of a chap, red-headed. Mr. Holmes was as fat as a balloon. He weighed as much as 300 and had double chins all the way down to his stomach. Mr. Longfellow was built like a prize fighter. His head was cropped and bristly, like as if he had a wig made of hairbrushes. His nose lay straight down his face, like a finger with the end joint tilted up. They had been drinking, I could see that, and what queer talk they used. And on it went. Expecting laughter by this point, Twain found himself speaking to a hushed crowd. Writing about the event later, Twain said he knew things weren't right. "Now then," he said, "the house's attention continued, but the expression of interest in the faces turned to a sort of black frost. I wondered what the trouble was. I didn't know. I went on, but with difficulty. In the end, I didn't know enough just to give up and sit down." Following the speech, newspapers across the country erupted with stories of Twain's rude remarks and bad taste. His book sales dropped off, as did, understandably, invitations to speak. Today, we think of Brother Samuel Clemens in his Mark Twain persona as having had the Midas touch when it came to writing, a sense of humor and popularity. It was not so. At the time of the speech, Twain was in some degree of financial stress and counted on speaking fees and book sales to carry him through. After what author William Dean Howells called the amazing mistake, the bewildering blunder, the cruel catastrophe, Twain had trouble making ends meet. With no prospect of financial success in the U.S., he was forced to undertake a grueling European speaking tour. Twain never completely recovered, financially or emotionally, from his faux pas. Near the end of his life, he wrote about it in an apologetic letter to a friend. "It seems," he said, "as if I must have been insane when I wrote that speech and saw no harm in it, no disrespect toward those men whom I revered so much." Maybe Brother Twain was just ahead of his time. Or maybe today we have become a little too desensitized to what was one time regarded as rude. For the Whence Came You podcast, this is Steve Harrison with the Masonic Minute.
All right, how about that awesome Masonic Minute with illustrious Brother Stephen L. Harrison? Be sure to check out the library where you can actually find links to all of the books that were written by illustrious Brother Harrison. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can get the videos of these when they come out, and feel free to make playlists of them and show them at your Masonic events. I've heard great things when we do this. Illustrious Brother Harrison has a unique gift for storytelling and just a wonderful and inspirational individual. So thank you so much to Brother Steve Harrison for all your hard work on these. It never gets old, and I look forward to listening to these all the time. That's all we have for this week. So if you like Masonic podcasts, I know you do, you're listening to this one, check us out Thursday nights at 9:30, 8:30 Central for the Masonic Roundtable. We go live. It's on YouTube. Watch live. Interact with us in the chat next to the show. And, of course, you can join up on iTunes and download the podcast as well. Watch and listen 2 different ways. Of course, this podcast and Masonic Roundtable are available on multiple podcast aggregate sources like Stitcher and all of those. But coming in January, probably late January, we'll have our own Echo app so that when you tell your Echo to play the show, you can pick up right where you left off, and it won't start from the beginning like it does on TuneIn or any of those other services that we are on. I hope you guys check those out when they become available. So I hope you check those out, and we'll provide links for those just as soon as they come out. Speaking of other things that are Masonic that you can get into, please check out the Midnight Freemasons, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. New content every single week, and that's it. So I hope you really enjoyed, and we will talk to you all next week. If you've got any questions, comments, concerns, hit me up at wcypodcast@gmail.com. Find me on Google+, Facebook, Twitter. We're everywhere. We're on Tumblr, so check it all out. And with that, stay on the level. For Whence Came You, I am Robert Johnson.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.